we consistently look at industries in their status quo as the only way they can operate. And it does take nudges, whether they're financial, environmental, or social, to discover new innovations. And in fact, the wine industry has gone back even further in the going to organic agriculture for wine, silviculture for wine, also saved a number of wineries money, and it really predated some of the early pushes towards the energy part of the story, my particular area. But they do highlight, as we saw with the Montreal Protocol and CFCs, where some of the major producers and users of CFCs saved money when they were pushed or pushed themselves towards going green. And so it really does highlight an opportunity story, and I do wish, even though this is on tape, that all members of the committee heard it, because the economic story is frequently one that change may be scary in the beginning, but in fact it's important and it drives innovation. And if we don't do it, we see, as we found in the U.S. energy industry, we fall behind. And perhaps the biggest side benefit, but it's really central to the story in my comments right now, will be we are discovering the areas where the U.S. has fallen behind. Not in a partisan way under a Democrat or Republican, but in fact under inaction for far too long on a number of areas where reinvesting in innovation would help us out. So I will focus my comments on just a few of the points, and then obviously happy to answer questions. I do apologize that on an education front, because my daughter's school has cut back on bus drivers, I must leave after my comments and questions to go be one of the parents driving middle school students to their basketball playoff game. So my apologies for that. But I want to start off with not only the framework that AB 32 sets, but also Governor Schwarzenegger's 2050 target, the 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the 1990 baseline. It's actually both of those two items in concert, along with many of the enabling legislation, the renewable portfolio standards, low carbon fuel standards, et cetera, that have set a path that not only was pioneering for California, but also established many of the frameworks that our cities around the Northern Hemisphere and Europe and nations around the world have adopted. And in fact, now the Obama administration has essentially chosen targets that, in the 2020 timetable, are now a little bit more aggressive than California, but the 2050 target is in fact the same. And so it really does highlight the degree to which California's innovations do get picked up, analyzed, get the tires kicked, and we get feedback on the story. I'll highlight only two cases in the interest of time. One is that I do serve on the EAC committee, and we are, of course, right now, the EAC, or the Goulder Commission as you referred to it, and we are right now looking at the various versions of the carbon market. There's been a very large amount of feedback from public sector, private sector individuals, utilities, MUDs, et cetera, and it's been exceedingly valuable in that committee in thinking through not only how one might price carbon, but also the ways that the monies might be used, either directly to support statewide programs or to be rebated to individuals around the state, something that the governor highlighted, particularly in his comments, an area he wanted to look at, a so-called cap and dividend. In fact, the memos for a cap and dividend are available for the public on the EAC website. Two topical areas highlight both the opportunity and also some of the real benefits to California. One of them I'm very pleased that Chairwoman Douglas mentioned, and that is the PACE program, which I feel a particular reason to triumph. One, I'm cited as the co-creator of that with Cisco DeVries. In fact, I'm a founding member of the company, Renewable Funding, that is doing some of the private operations on this area. But it highlights a very important part of the story. Not only was the PACE program something that flipped the financing and made clean energy, both efficiency and renewables, a zero upfront cost opportunity, but it's also become an export industry for the state, a revenue-generating operation. We have received personally in my laboratory, University of California, Berkeley, over 1,000 calls from municipalities around the world, and Renewable Funding, the company, which I'm a founding member, has received more than 5 times that in terms of phone calls and potential business opportunities from groups that want to highlight versions of that story. So it has, in fact, generated not just international attention, but Renewable Funding, for example, is managing the PACE programs for both in-state cities like San Diego and out-of-state cities like Boulder in doing this operation. So in one cute version of the story, it does mean that this becomes a sort of California is the anti-Las Vegas. Good ideas that start here don't stay here. And that's a pretty important lesson because California does innovate. It has a history of innovation, but it also needs the feedback, not only to fine-tune the business models, but also to fine-tune the ways that the regulation can evolve. And in fact, the Waxman-Markey, the House version that has a somewhat more aggressive 2020 target than California, highlights the kind of feedback that the Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission and many of the researchers in state are looking at for how can we now go further, but doing so in a way that is productive in terms of economic growth. And this really does lead me to the second point, the one for which I wish more of the members are here, and that is the discussion on the green job story. The highlight of the slide on the screen really does bring up a huge opportunity for California. So my laboratory has been involved in doing analysis of the jobs creation capacity of the industry. In fact, we started in the early 2000s at the request of Senators Kennedy and McCain to do an analysis that became an early report from my lab. And in fact, I believe all the members of the committee were given our latest report. It's something that we will unveil in Copenhagen in a few days. It's written by myself and the CEO of Vestas, the world's largest wind company today, actually grew out of technology developed at U.S. national laboratories that was not fully commercialized in the U.S., but the Danes chose to commercialize it much more fully than we did. But that job story has a couple key aspects. One is that in the report that all members of the committee have, the analysis we do is for net job growth. So we examine explicitly the job expected to be lost in the fossil fuel area and the jobs expected to be gained in the renewable area. And because roughly 20% of our energy in California now comes from out-of-state coal, we get a net increase in jobs that's even more than just the job gains by going solar and going to efficiency. We get a energy security for the state benefit as well. And so I not only encourage all the committee members to read the report, but online on the website of my laboratory, University of California, Berkeley, the RAIL lab, Renewable and Appropriate Energy, we provide as open source software the Excel spreadsheets where you can download those analyses where you see a number of scenarios. We look at scenarios with price on carbon. We look at scenarios where the country meets President Obama's so-called 25 by 25 plan. That's a 25% national RPS. And we examine gross and net job numbers. And in fact, all of those scenarios show job growth, including the numbers for the expected decrease in jobs in some of the fossil fuel areas. So I want to correct the record because it's important to note that the analysis that is publicly available does in fact highlight those sorts of benefits. The last piece of comments here I want to make is that over the last few months, my laboratory, a number of researchers from Europe, from the United States, have been putting special attention on the U.S.-China relationship, and in fact, the California-China relationship. I have spent a week in China in each of the last 3 months. The most recent trip was with the president's visit when President Obama and President Hu met. And in fact, my laboratory signed a research agreement and a cooperative deployment agreement on smart grid programs, not only with NGOs and university groups in China, but also with the China State Grid Corporation, which has a $140 billion per year deployment budget for new grid technology. They are in fact using the analytic model, the so-called switch model, developed in my laboratory, where we plan out new energy growth, investments in energy efficiency, and the need and location of new transmission lines of various sorts. And that's a critical example because there are a number of high-profile groups working in concert with the Chinese right now, but we are finding that the ability to bring larger amounts of green power with many less transmission lines than we thought even a decade ago is one of the important conclusions by developing what I would call a system science of energy planning, i.e. not just a focus on turbines, whether it's a gas turbine or a wind turbine, not just a focus on efficiency, but thinking about the whole system.